Hello, it's Matthew, the average gun owner, and I just wanted to take a minute to answer the question as to why politicians and certain anti-constitutionalists are constantly trying to outlaw and ban standard capacity magazines. So, we hear the term high capacity magazine, and basically that's just a made up term, a very arbitrary and capricious standard that has been set to 10 rounds. There's clearly no evidence that having a 10 round magazine as opposed to 12, 15, 17, or 19 makes a difference. And the anti-constitutionalists even admit that, but they just decided that reducing the capacity of a magazine would somehow have a public safety benefit. Now, the argument we usually hear in favor of a 10 round magazine is that it would lessen the severity of a mass shooting event. Now, put aside the fact that even the FBI, DOJ studies have shown that having an armed civilian there would most likely lessen the impact of a mass shooting event. The argument is, well, it will take longer for the attacker to change magazines, and therefore it would give you the opportunity to rush the attacker. Well, we've clearly seen that in some of the very high-profile cases. Those individuals, in fact, used 10-round reduced capacity magazines, and it had no effect on their ability to carry out carnage. We've also seen another recent example where somebody did rush a shooter and apparently, from what I can see, helped stop the event from going any further, but that person had to give up their life to do so. I think there's this old video I like to watch on YouTube every once in a while. It's a sheriff's department who put on a demonstration, and they brought a few civilians out, pure amateur, civilians out without a lot of firearms experience, and they had them, fire a course of fire and then go about a magazine change, and they had somebody else set up at a barrel, and they would run as far as they could while that person was changing magazines. And the distance they could close in the period of time that even a newbie could change a magazine was somewhere around 21 feet, I think it was, or less. Well, the problem there is, even with a 10 round magazine, by the time you have your fifth or sixth shot off, that person more than likely has retreated away from you and is more than 20 feet away from you. So I just don't see how it rings true. And there's probably why the reason we don't have any demonstrative, objective evidence that it would make any change. So let me give you an example. So people talk about, let's talk about pistols first. So I'm not checking it for the internet people. I already checked it. I know what it is. So take this firearm, and people say, well, you can reduce the capacity of these to 10 rounds, and that'll give somebody the opportunity to advance and rush the shooter and stop the incident from going forward. Well, so I have some experience with firearms, as an instructor and a somewhat competitive shooter at times. I obviously have spent a lot of time in practice changing magazines. So it's kind of hard to demonstrate this myself as somebody who has that kind of experience. But basically, I guess if you could take out the fact that I'm sitting here and I'm staging the magazines and I'm looking at the magazines and I'm concentrating and paying attention to what I'm doing, maybe I could not focus on it. Maybe I could even close my eyes. Maybe I could put myself in a situation where I'm trying to think about what I'm saying and still conduct magazine changes off magazines that are merely dropping into my lap. They're falling in every different direction, and I'm unable to stage them before I reload them into the pistol. So I think what you can get from this is even somebody with very little experience on changing magazines and working with firearms would be able to, especially when they're staged in holsters on your belt or in a pocket facing forward and ready to go, somebody could change these pretty much instantaneously. I don't know how fast you could run, but if I've already fired 8, 9, or 10 shots at you and you've been running away from me, from here, go, I've already reloaded it, go, I've already reloaded it, go, I've already reloaded it, go. I mean, I think you get the point here. I mean, I could do this all day long, literally. And to answer the question in the in the subject line of this video, what is the reasoning upon which politicians out there are trying to reduce magazine capacity on us? The answer is pure ignorance. That's really what it comes down to. It's just a matter of pure ignorance, because what you're essentially doing by reducing magazine capacity is making it more difficult for somebody under stress to change a magazine. And what person would generally be the one under stress, whether you're in your home, whether you were just out to dinner, friends and family, or walking home from work. It would be the victim upon whom the criminal got the jump on. I mean, I couldn't imagine being in a situation where somebody got the jump on me and attacked me with a knife, firearm, or other weapon, and I had to defend myself. I would like to think that all my training would come through and win the day, but I think it's clear to most people who's studied defensive situations that we kind of resort back to, you know, our lowest denominator in terms of, you know, muscle memory and training and gross motor skills. I think it's pretty clear that putting me in that situation, all you're really doing is putting me at a disadvantage to defend myself, because let's just say I do have a botched magazine change. Why was I put in that situation? So to answer it from a legal standpoint, you know, the Supreme Court has ruled that common arms in use are covered by the Second Amendment and are what, you know, the average person, the average gun owner should be able to own. And the basis for that is basically, is it a firearm upon which the average person would use, you know, for the purpose of self-defense? And if it is such a firearm that somebody would want to use or reasonably, you know, believe could use to defend themselves in a situation, then that firearm would be covered by the Second Amendment. So I don't see how these courts in certain jurisdictions are ruling that that's not the case, that the average person wouldn't want a standard capacity magazine. For example, you know, this compact P320 comes standard with a 15-round magazine. These are state compliant 10-round magazines. So I wouldn't go out and purposefully buy only a 10-round magazine to defend myself. If this firearm was made for and had the capability of holding 15 rounds, I want all 15 rounds at my disposal before I have to reload the firearm. So I think clearly if you were to apply the Heller standard properly, there would be no other conclusion that a 15-round magazine, which was what this firearm was designed for, which is why we call it standard capacity at 15 rounds or more, whatever that gun was designed for, that, you know, that would be the common arm in use that I want to use for it. So to further illustrate this, and to make even a different point that I'm frustrated that some people aren't making, I want to show you what happens when we turn to the rifle. So here we have an example of what I think most people will agree is the most common firearm in use in rifle form, at least for personal self-defense. Now, historically, I think many people would have assumed that was the shotgun, but, you know, sales, at least since the sunset of the '94 ban, have clearly demonstrated that, you know, the modern sporting rifle, patterned rifle, is probably the most popular. This particular rifle was designed to have a magazine that extended. Most courses who teach defensive rifle use will teach magazine changes that involve actually gripping the body of a magazine. A little bit different than what we had with the pistol, where you kind of cradled the bottom of the pistol magazine. You would index your finger, you would kind of cradle the bottom, so when you push that magazine home, it's basically the palm of your hand that's pushing it home. There are some people that do that with an AR pattern rifle. A lot of people don't train that method because what you're doing is you have your hand so far away from the magazine well, it's kind of hard to line it up. So usually we take a grip. This Mission First Tactical has a pretty nice grip area here, and you can pretty well index your hand on it. I particularly like this model for that reason. And it gets your hand a lot closer to the insertion area in the magazine well. But as you see here, I can actually insert that magazine and lock it in place in one quick, smooth movement. And the problem with the rifle, when we start talking about a reduced capacity magazine, 10-round magazine in certain states where the prohibition is in place, it's really frustrating to me that people aren't actually bringing a rifle into the courtroom and simply demonstrating it. I know we had the case here in New Jersey. People were excited. Oh, we have a Republican-appointed judge. Yeah, it made no difference. Made no difference. He upheld the ban. And the problem you have with the rifle is here is a 10-round magazine. 10 round rifle magazine. Now they do make 10 rounders that have a full size body, but there's a question as to whether they've permanently been altered. I know they pin them at the bottom, but there are brands where you can simply buy a new follower and a spring and or a base plate, even just the base plate, not the follower, sorry. Buy a new base plate and a spring, and you now have a 30 round standard capacity magazine. So I guess there could be some questions there legally if someone really wanted to make an issue out of those magazines as to whether they are permanently altered under the law of certain states. So if you really truly want a 10 round magazine, or you receive a firearm that comes with a 10 round magazine that clearly cannot be altered to hold more than 10 rounds so that you ensure compliance with the law, this is what you end up with. And in order to insert that magazine in the regular method for reloading an AR pattern rifle, I mean, you're kind of doing a multi-step process here. So who does that benefit? Does it benefit the responsible gun owner, the lawful citizen, or the victim in this case? Does it benefit that person? Is this an arm that you would consider commonly in use for self-defense? Would you literally go to a store? Would anybody in their right mind go to the store and say, give me an AR pattern rifle with those stubby little magazines, ones where I can't use the typical loading method because it's not going to fully insert? So I either have to insert it, holding it from the bottom and lining it up and kind of doing the push and slam method, because there's really nothing to grab onto. This is it. I have nothing to grab onto to push that magazine in and get it to lock in. And I certainly have very little to hold onto to pull it in the case of a double feed, which would kind of stick the magazine in place. So this would be very difficult. I have very little material to get a purchase on to pull it out. This is certainly not a magazine that anybody that has any experience with firearms would want to use in this particular firearm. So again, I go back to the example of a person under stress. You have, a victim under stress, someone trying to protect their family. We had a case just a town over from me where you had 3 or 4 people show up in 2 cars to carjack a family. They held the guy's daughter with a knife at her throat, and the gentleman was very crafty in figuring out a way to head back into the house to grab his personal defense firearm. I think he offered to get the keys to the other car in case the carjackers wanted both cars. The carjackers got greedy and he came out with a pistol. But that was a situation of multiple attackers, and he's lucky that they ran off, because if they decided to fight, he's now in a state where he was limited to 10 rounds. And in order to defend himself, he would have to make a magazine change. I think in that case, he didn't have a spare magazine. Didn't have one staged on him. He retreated back to the house to grab his firearm and didn't have other magazines available. And if, that's just the situation you're in. And in that circumstance, if you ask that person, the common person, what firearm they would want at their disposal to defend themselves, I'm pretty certain he wouldn't have said, I want a reduced capacity 10 round magazine. But in this situation, you are putting the civilian, the victim, at a significant disadvantage to be able to defend themselves, especially from multiple attackers. Remember, the victim doesn't have the opportunity to recruit more of their friends to come along and help them. Usually attackers will isolate victims before they attack them. So in situations like that, where I'm isolated from all my other gun-toting friends, I'm going to be fighting on my own. I don't have the advantage to call in reinforcements. I don't have the advantage that the attackers have to go out in crews, to go out and carjack people or rob homes in crews. They'll go out in a crew of people, and I'm at a significant disadvantage as it is. So when a lawmaker tells me I too should be limited to reduced capacity 10 round magazines, they are putting me at a serious disadvantage. And if you apply the ruling in Heller as to whether this is a firearm that would be in common use that the average person would want to use to defend themselves, I think the answer is an emphatic no. Again, this is Matthew, the Average Gun Owner.